That's welcome. Well, good afternoon. Welcome back again. And this time we are dealing with the impact of housing estate expropriation, or so-called popularly known as regeneration, the human impact and how that is manifested in terms of the human rights violations in the legal context, at least within Europe or the United Kingdom. So the aim, and I document this in a text which is again available on Amazon and other media houses, sort of publication houses, and retail stores, and it's human rights and housing estate expropriation, the human impact on communities. And I think one of the publications, they have the different editions, but one of the publications I'm talking about now is the one in January 2020. So the aim of the text is to assess whether human rights law is an effective mechanism in to challenge the harm caused by housing estate regeneration through the use of compulsory purchase orders in the United Kingdom. And the focus of the text, it relates to the actions of local authorities or public bodies that attract the jurisdiction of the European Convention on Human Rights and the applicable international human rights law. The book analyzes any potential or existing human rights breaches associated with estate regeneration under the European Convention on Human Rights regime, and briefly discusses the relevant international human rights law. Generally speaking, international human rights law, although discussed briefly here, it does require a separate analysis, probably a separate chapter or book, in terms of assessing how international human rights law safeguards against violations associated with CPO enforced estate regeneration. The ECR rights examined here, which are associated with the use of CPOs in housing estate regeneration, briefly enumerated, and include such, for example, the right to a peaceful and quiet enjoyment of one's home, respect for the home under Article 8, fairness, transparency, and the expeditious nature of the whole process under Article 6, equality of treatment under Article 14, freedom of association and expression under Article 9 and 10, Article 13 dealing with just compensation or the inappropriate legal remedies, Article 2, which covers the right to life and health, of course, by implication, the equal treatment, impact on children, and applicable international law as indicated in details in the book. The European Convention on Human Rights that are discussed in the book are juxtaposed naturally with the underlying practical policies, practices, decisions, and impact on individuals or the wider community. Commencing with the initial decisions, the book starts with the initial decisions, consultation process, internal processes, viability reports. That interesting phrase, viability reports, is an issue of, let's say, it's a controversial one in communities, and the various entities such as local authorities and developers, but that requires a separate topic, and it's covered under in the book in a sort of a more like a chapter. But there are also environmental issues, equality, of course, in terms of the disproportionate impact on racial minorities, planning permission, and the eventual adverse impact on residents in the respective communities. The impact on communities is assessed by examining fundamental life indicators like employment, finances, culture, health, and of course, as mentioned before, the disproportionate impact, detrimental impact on racial minorities, in particular black and brown folks, obviously, which make up a huge demographic in London, which is one of the attraction of people living in London from racial minorities, because there's that safety support network, which is so crucial. And of course, the book also covers the statutory compensation in terms of whether it's fair or equitable to justify the dislocation, the displacement of people from their settled communities, and whether really there's any monetary value that can compensate for that. But if not, especially, I think some people argue that displacement through this from one's home is a form of psychological violence. And so whether the compensation actually can ever compensate that, but if not, whether at least the financial compensation can allow communities to, especially in the case of leaseholders or people who own their properties, to ever buy again in those communities. And I'm talking specifically in areas like London, where property prices are obviously high, and when these the people in the communities bought their homes or settled there maybe decades ago, they can afford their mortgages, but the prices have so risen that their current circumstances and the issues around inflation and wages cannot allow them to in any way meaningfully be able to afford to buy again. And so the issue then becomes, can that compensation actually meaningfully and equitably be in a position to allow them to buy outright in the communities that they have lived and spent most of their lives in, raise children, set up support networks, work as a community. And so that is in a nutshell that the book Human Rights and Housing Estate Expropriation covers. There are other topics, other books on the subjects, and that I'll briefly will mention and discuss in the forthcoming segment, such as the one of the that is London specific is the one entitled that the rich have lawyers, the London takings. But we'll go back into details in our next segment, and I'll see you soon. So the book, this specific one, the January 2020 edition, is Human Rights and Housing Estate Expropriation, the Human Impact on Communities. Thank you, and we'll go for a break, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for listening. Remember, it's legally speaking, covering issues and the impact, the day-to-day lived experiences of people, not just locally but globally, because we may live local but the impact is global. Thank you, and speak to you soon.